Seele, she's still worth it. Here's why. First off, my Seele's S1 E2, the same as my Imbibed Lunai, who's E2 S1. And I feel like, as a result of me having essentially a bunch of DPSs, I can talk about not only how good she is, but how she compares to the other characters that people are saying are stronger as a result. Imbibed Lunai, Blade, Jingliu, and so on. Now, right off the rip, Seele is single target based. That is her biggest weakness, and that is the single fact people point to a lot of times when they say Seele's bad in comparison to Jingliu, in comparison to Imbibed Lunai, in comparison to Blade, and so on. And, well, yes, this is true. Seele is a hunt character. She has the same issue as Yanqing. She is single target oriented. As a result, we have two camps. You have individuals who say MOC is multi-target oriented. You usually have two bosses, like these two, for example. And as a result, Seele falls off in comparison to them. And then you also have the camp who say she fell off in terms of meta prioritization in terms of DPS. First off, the individual who fell off is Jing Yuan, because during his release, the banner and the MOC favored him so heavily in terms of the buffs he got that it made us really ignore a lot of the other issues he had. Seele's biggest quote-unquote issue is, first off, she needs to kill an enemy to proc Resurgence. And second off, she's single target. Now, the second half she can't fix. The first half relies so inherently on investment that it can be applied to any character. If Jingliu doesn't kill the enemy, she's taking more turns. Same issue. So, I don't want to talk about that. Instead, I want to discuss what it really means when a character falls off. Jing Yuan is an individual who relies inherently on more supports and who is getting essentially a dedicated buffer next patch or next update, that being Topaz. And so, yeah, Jing Yuan has fallen off a bit, especially because Erudition was supposed to be AoE. We had a single target character and we have an AoE character, and AoE has been essentially blasted by Jingliu, by Blade, by Imbibed Lunai to the extent to where the AoE that Jing Yuan has is so much less so important because he relies on that Lightning Lord taking the action after him, whereas all these characters kind of just do their thing. And so that's the first thing to consider. Second off, yeah, she's single target, and yeah, she's not going to deal as much damage in those scenarios as a Jingliu, as a Blade, and so on. That doesn't inherently make her a bad character. If you're looking for a DPS, any of the current characters are good. In the background here, I'm just going to run MOC with Seele. Now, the enemy isn't weak to Quantum, but I'm going to run her in this, and we're going to see how many cycles it takes her. Because yes, second half is essentially weak to all of her elements. So second half will be Imbibed Lunai, Yukong, and first half will be Seele, Silverwolf, Lynx, and a Fu Xuan. And so in this instance for her team, you have the damage mitigation of Fu Xuan, you have the passive healing of a Lynx along with the HP boost, and then you have Silverwolf for adding the weakness. Now, I'm going to let it run completely in auto in the background. I understand it's going to make a bunch of mistakes, but at the end of the day, I feel like it's important just to show you an example of how auto would run with this team. Seele isn't a bad character. She doesn't get her resurgence when she doesn't kill an enemy. Cool beans. I understand that could be a drawback for a lot of you, but Seele has access to some of the best teammates in the game. A mono quantum team is really good. The ability to essentially deal double the damage by taking multiple actions per turn and then getting more energy is extremely good. Her Eidolons are really helpful. And the ability to self-buff your own speed means that for the vast majority of you, a character like Seele, who buffs her own speed by 25% and then 50% with Eidolon 2, don't need to get speed substats. And yes, that may make it a nightmare to speed tune her, but nonetheless, it alleviates the pressure on your relics. Now, as of right now, we've taken 2 turns, I believe, and we're still in the second half of this. Cool, I understand that you may be in a position to where you have other characters who can change that, but if you're a new player and you're looking at this character and you're wondering, is her damage still good? Is she still worth it to pull for? In comparison to Jingliu, yes, I can say she's worth it. Is she better than Jingliu? That's a bit of an iffy scenario. Jingliu buffs herself so much that she's incredibly easy to build up, and so I can understand the appeal of having a character who's easy to get going, really good once you get her going, has AoE, but in comparison to that, Seele gives herself speed, takes more actions per turn, so you don't need to speed tune to get to that 170 or 150 or 160 speed mark to get there to get those multi-actions per turn. Yes, it makes speed tuning a nightmare, but she has passive resistance penetration just in her kit. That makes it extremely easy and really good and actually viable to get the quantum set going. Unlike things like crit, unlike things like attack, like Jingliu gives herself, damage and resistance penetration don't necessarily fall downwards. Once you ignore defense enough, you don't really lose any damage as a result. It's always useful. Whereas, yeah, crit damage, and once you get over a certain point, like let's say hypothetically you get over 300% crit, yeah, it's probably not useful for you. But once you get over a certain point of attack, that falls off. Once you get a certain number of crit, anything above 100 falls off. Whereas damage percent, resistance penetration, quantum damage, so on, that is much less likely to fall off in terms of scaling than other abilities and other damage bonuses. And it's also a lot easier to get that up. Speed equals more actions per turn. More actions per turn equals more damage per turn and per rotation. So she may not have the initial high base damage of somebody like a Empowered Lunai that you're seeing here. She may not have the additional high damage of other characters. She may not have, and may be more bound to supports. But those supports are really good. If you're looking at follow-up attack characters, yes, Topaz could theoretically be future-proof because she can buff. And yes, that would make her a mix of a Hunt and a Harmony character. But as a result of her being a Hunt and Harmony character, her damage is lower by comparison. And at that point, I would have to ask you, are you okay with pulling for a character with the whole knowledge that their inherent value relies on you pulling for another unit after their launch? I'm not really caring about Empowered Lunai's auto run here. I just bought Japard here just because I couldn't think of anyone else, even though I had a Bailu. But regardless of circumstance, she's a good character. She doesn't have this level of AoE. And yeah, she may be a bit more reliant on killing and defeating an enemy to get her energy back or to essentially get her buff up so that way she can deal more damage. And that may be a drawback for you personally. And as a result of that, she is more relic dependent. She does require a bit more investment to get going, but once you get her going, she performs extremely well. And due to the nature of her kit, unlike Empowered Lunai, unlike Jingliu, she is not crippled if she does not either A, have her stacks up like Jingliu, or she does not lose damage if the enemy is an imaginary weakness. Now in this instance, Empowered Lunai does have more, I think 24% crit damage because the enemy has imaginary weakness. That's a bonus. Jingliu, if she doesn't have her enhanced state, she loses about 50% crit. That is a downside. And so every character has a drawback. I just think individuals right now are hyping up Topaz because she is a buffer and that could be useful to you. But if she is not a buffer you're going to use, if she does not buff the characters you actively use, you will be disappointed. You will have wasted your gem. And if you are a new player, it is incredibly difficult to evaluate units that you otherwise don't have access to. We don't have Topaz, and we don't know how much a follow-up attack set alongside Topaz are going to average out to a damage buff. And we don't know if at that moment she will still be worth it after all the characters have received other utilities. And so of course, I'm going to say Seele looks good because she does. I'm going to say Seele is a good character because she is, and I have her. And my Tingyun just died, of course, because she always dies. It's impossible not to get your Tingyun to stay alive. But I legitimately believe that if you're in a position to where you're just starting the game out and you're wondering, is Jingliu worth it, or is Seele worth it, or is Silverwolf and so on, all these new units worthwhile, the only character who's iffy is a Jing Yuan. And this team is failing. Thank you, Auto Battle. Well, never mind, Japard has his Ota, never mind. I do believe that the 1.0 characters are still in good positions. Jing Yuan is legitimately still a good character. The only downside he faces is that destruction units do AoE better than he does. That is it. Other than that, he's still performing quite well, and I legitimately do believe that if you invest into him enough, he's going to perform incredibly well for the amount of Primo Gems or gems spent. He just may have more growing pains than others. And I do think we were led to believe more than what we got. He got a whole trailer depicting him as a legend, and then you got him out and he kind of hits like a wet noodle unless you buff him up with Tingyun. But that's just my opinion. Tell me yours. As my team dies, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you pull Seele. If you have Seele, invest more into her. Her Eidolons are actually pretty good. E1 is just 15% crit. E2 is just additional 25% attack. Her light cone is actually really nice. But I understand your reserves. I understand why individuals may view her as lesser than the others. I just think she's still an exceptional unit. She just may not perform on par with a Jingliu if you invest equally in terms of Eidolons into them both. Either way, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.